Welcome to Beyond Revenue, the podcast where we break down how revenue leaders actually operate when the pressure is on. I'm your host, Michael Jäger. On this show, we are not only chasing theories or perfect frameworks. We focus on real decisions, real tactics, real trade-offs. We want to focus or reveal the habits, what really shapes revenue growth. Today, this episode is all about the modern CRO role. I'm joined by Mark Reich, CRO of Lawpilots. Mark has led revenue across sales, customer success in fast-growing, complex environments and has seen firsthand where this role succeeds and where it breaks down. Mark, I'm very happy to have you with us.
Michael, thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here.
You've owned lots of revenue from scaling sales teams globally to owning the full revenue engine today. To set the stage, can you walk us through a little bit how you think about the CRO role at Lawpilots today or in general, and how you personally are accountable and for the things you own or the for things you steal, and what is your biggest revenue challenge at the moment?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's a lot of different ways to answer that, right? I do think that every company has a slightly different set of roles in leadership, and maybe people interpret the roles slightly differently. And I do think you always need to adjust to the situation as well, both in the leadership of the company, what skill sets are there, what responsibilities do you have, but also to the reality of the companies. In our case, so at Lawpilots, we're two in the C-level. There's our CEO, Kodla, who is basically in charge of product. She's a real industry insider. She knows the ins and outs. And she also leads our people teams, finance, all these functions. And I'm essentially responsible for everything that's go-to-market. So in my case, that includes obviously sales, customer success, but also marketing, partnerships. So basically everything that we kind of do to serve our customers. And yeah, personally, I mean, obviously I do have a bit of a structure there and a really strong leadership team that takes on different roles beyond that. But I do try to, kind of answer to the board in terms of all of our KPIs when it comes to top of funnel, how we get customers through that funnel, and also how we serve them and how we make them happy in the long run. So essentially, I'm the one who comes on a board meeting and says, look, here's where we stand, here's where our forecast is, where we're going. This is kind of more on the CRO side with us, a little bit less on the finance side. And that's kind of just the way that we do it at Lawpilots.
Interesting. How would you say is this different to the CRO role you maybe did 5 years ago?
In terms of what metrics you're responsible for, obviously depends a little bit on the business and also, what ownership the finance function takes, for example, right? I do think a CRO role as such, you do need to have a good understanding of the business metrics, the business plan, how you track against this. And you are the person that people look to say, where is the business going to be 6 to 12 or even, longer out months from now in terms of just revenue performance, right? So I do think that's something that you need to understand. So I don't think that's necessarily changed. It's just the way that I've always interpreted the role. I think a few things that have changed for me personally is on the one hand, we do have a really broad definition. So I think it's a really good development that I'm able to combine the marketing function together with all the sales and customer serving functions, which really allow us to kind of come up with a unified strategy. If something isn't working on one end of the funnel or of the kind of the cycle of serving our customers, then we can kind of see what are the different things that lead there. Is it something in the ICP that we're targeting with marketing? Is something wrong in the way that we position our product in sales? Or is it essentially the way that we deliver the product? And everything is kind of interconnected. And I really enjoy having the ability to look at that kind of with a bit of a bird's eye. But I think the thing that really has changed is obviously there's been a lot of technological change in recent years. I mean, I'm sure that this is something that a lot of people will be addressing these days. And I know that you guys are also actively supporting many companies with that. And I would say that it's expected of the CRO today to have a good understanding of the tool stack, of how it's evolving and how the GTM functions are changing with the new technological capabilities that you have. I think that this was a little bit less the focus a few years ago, and it's become a lot more, you really have to wrap your head around that these days.
Fair enough, especially as it can be a big driver for efficiency now, right? When using AI-capable tools, which maybe even replace roles in your function or just make them much more successful.
Absolutely.
So sales versus customer success. Where do you see the biggest misunderstanding between those two roles?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because that's been one of the key plays that I introduced joining Lawpilots over 2 years ago. We had a kind of a full cycle motion, and the mindset of that team was really to bring in customers, whatever the cost. So we had great growth on the front end, but we ended up seeing that a lot of those customers were either not a great fit or they were a great fit, but we weren't actually capable of delivering what we had promised. We have a bit of a complex delivery process. And I think in that context, it was really, really relevant for us to create kind of a bit of a hunter-farmer split to build an organization with specific roles. And ultimately, I think the reason for that is if you have such a model where it makes sense to have specialization because there are just different tasks, then you will see sales being really driven to win customers. They're often incentivized that way. It's also the mentality that you want, right? You want people to say, hey, I'm going to try to win that customer, even if it's difficult for whatever reason. And customer success is obviously incentivized and inherently interested in just having the right customer, growing them, making sure that they're happy. And so there's always a little bit of tension where sometimes sales will just bring the customer in quickly, maybe haven't explained the ins and outs, maybe it hasn't been so clear what some of the downsides or some of the difficulties of implementing the solution are. And then customer success kind of has to pick it up in that way. And that's really something that if you create these two teams, you have to deal a little bit with that friction, and you have to kind of build the incentives and the culture to make sure that this still serves the interests of the customer.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I would say it's good that you sparked the incentivization because, right, usually customer success is incentivized on a long-term relationship with NRR, and I think there we can even think it a little bit further that sales is right. It's just one role along the journey with the client. Yeah. What would you say are CROs' best practices? Right, I see you quite often on different events and sharing events. But what would you say are CROs' best practices, which actually are more harm than good for a company?
This is a funny question. Obviously, when I came across it, you kind of sent it along to me that you would ask that, and I thought I had a few answers to this, and then I came up with one that I thought was okay. Maybe that's interesting, and this is around OKR. So I'm not saying it's just necessarily a CRO best practice, but it's certainly a tech business best practice to use OKR to run your business. And it's something that most CROs also use, or at least I've used it across different companies. I've seen it being used to kind of run the strategic initiatives of their teams. And I've actually seen that fail very, very often because I think that revenue organizations are inherently very metrics driven. And when you have this idea of OKR where you start coming with key results, you sometimes get a little creative around, okay, aside from the stuff that I'm already measuring in the funnel, what is now more relevant, or what other metric can I come up with that really kind of signifies that the strategy is working? And so what I've seen more often than not, and I'm very interested to hear if you had the same experience, but I've seen OKR being set up. And then at the end of the quarter, people are like, oh, we had this OKR. We did a bunch of initiatives. They were kind of the right ones, but what was this target again? Did we actually hit it? Nobody reported it. So we moved away from this year to kind of an adaptation of a more classic concept called the balanced scorecards, very kind of management consultancy stuff. But we've adapted it to our needs, and it's been very, very helpful. It's a lot more focused on the strategy of the business and then deriving tasks from it. And then we've kind of split we call it true north KPIs from that a little bit. And I can clearly see now, I run it all in Notion. We can clearly see what our teams are doing, if the tasks are being completed. The project management is happening in the same system as the reporting on the strategy and the strategic levers is happening. And I think that's really great. That's a lot of fun for me to kind of break up that paradigm of always using the same system to drive strategic initiatives. So that's my answer here.
Well, I like it. What we see quite often is that companies fail in how to track their OKRs, right? Because the challenge around this is they more focus on how do I now write that key,
exactly.
How do I write it that I can actually track it? And what the key result, and what I then quite often see, there's no more deadline around this anymore, right? So because we talk about how we track it and weekly progress, and sometimes it's just easy to say, look, that's the task and that's the deadline, and we manage against the deadline. Because if we have a proper to-do list in the end, right, very quick and dirty. We have a proper to-do list with responsible and responsibilities and the due date. Then we can actually see, because that's that, and I see that in my company as well. Quite often we forget due dates, right? In aligning. So the task distribution is good and the discussion around, but when does it need to be delivered? And I think I like that you picked that up, because I think it's quite often for teams very challenging, and most probably we all do it not the right way with the OKRs, but quite challenging how to really track it. But fair enough, right? If multiple people fail to doing it, then there's most probably a more easier solution towards it.
I want to say there are different ways to do it, right? That's not everybody has to use the same concept
Absolutely.
for running their
100%.
company. That's just my suggestion here.
I think so too. So let's get started with two tactics, and which actually brought something and worked and increased performance, and one tactic which didn't work. So what was your first tactic which you applied? What was the challenge you had? What did you do, and what was the outcome?
I kind of gave it away a little bit there already, because the first thing we did was, in fact, implement those specific roles. I think it always makes sense. I mean, I always like to think about what are the tasks that we need to do to be successful, and then who can do those tasks, right? It's kind of from an organizational point of view. And then based on that, we kind of build the structure of the organization, and then we try to find the right people to fill those roles, which typically are already in the organization in the case of Lawpilots, right? I think that this was a really helpful exercise, because we were not, doing really well post sales, right? We weren't, delivering, the product in a way. It wasn't an experience that our customers appreciated, and we were really able to change that way. And I think, a few things come with that. There's one is identifying the right people to do those roles, kind of building their playbook, what they need to do. But then we already spoke about it, incentives. It was the first time in the company that we had different incentive structures. New business being really, kind of incentivized on new business, and the post-sales team having these kind of NRR-related metrics, right? And I do think that this changed a little bit the mindset. And in particular, in our case, we didn't really have it at the time. We didn't really have a problem acquiring customers. It was really more about growing them, what we needed to do. And it really, having this focused account management team that was kind of driving those cross sells and making sure that delivery was happening in a successful way, really made a big difference. I do think that this is not for every environment. Not to say that it's always the right way to split those roles, but in our case, I think it was a really good strategy to think about those incentives and kind of having a specialization of tasks. Yeah, and then we implemented obviously the tool stack behind that, and kind of found ways to align, because obviously once you create that split, you need to also bring it back together again to have a good experience for the customer. And so that came after, and I think that was, on the whole, was a pretty successful exercise.
Nice, really like it. What's the second tactic which you actually applied, which led to success?
Yeah, I'm going to stay on the post-sales side here, because I think that this is probably the element that many CROs, most of us, we come from sales. I do as well. Like, we come from kind of the growth, the new business side. And in recent years, I think, customer success was always really relevant in recurring business models, but it's been particularly kind of put to the forefront in the last couple of years.
It was more revealed, right? That you actually need to focus on the rest.
Exactly, right? There's an element to recurring business which is about actually making it recurring, right? So I'm going to focus on that as well, because I think many CROs need to kind of wrap their head around it. In fact, one of my key hires was actually a really strong VP customer success. Because it's an area where I've led teams in that regard for many years, but I'm not, let's say, a subject matter expert as deeply. So that was a really, really key hire for me to move that team forward. But the tactic that I want to say that we're going to kind of apply here is we moved the team to more of a service mindset. So before, we had kind of a bit of a self-serve, very product-oriented mindset, where it was like, okay, here's our product, go use it, right? Thank you very much. And we realized that many of our customers were failing with small things to actually successfully apply it, right? To actually successfully use it. We do e-learnings is not as such very, very complex, but it's oftentimes, the thing about an e-learning is that you need to get it out to a large part of your organization, maybe tens of thousands of employees, which for many software products that you buy is not the case. Very few software products are actually rolled out to the entire company. So many of our customers, they don't actually have that experience to actually roll out something in that way. And so we created a much more service-oriented mindset where we had kind of project management. We introduced Gantt charts for some of our bigger customers. And we made it a habit to see many of these customers in person, to have workshops with them, to really plan out how is the rollout of this going to be over the next year or so. And this really required a bit of a mindset shift because we kind of first grew in COVID times when there wasn't really a face-to-face culture. And there was a lot of interest around our product. So it was really like, kind of just install it and then let's go. And this service mindset and really understanding how can the customer be successful, I think was a really pivotal moment for us. And then again, I mean, obviously I'm starting more on the principle, on the strategy side here. From that, we derived a bunch of tactics that are, kind of implementing the right tools for that, understanding, is a customer doing well or not, measuring adoption, right? Those types of things. I think they come from that, but you first need to have a bit of that mindset shift where you're like, okay, the product isn't going to be successful by itself.
Interesting. And the result was seen in the NRR, or?
Yeah. We were able to improve the NRR by I think around about 10% in the first year. And this, I think was very, very notable. It made a massive difference. I mean, I remember the first couple of customer interactions that I had. There were a lot of customers that were like, look, I mean, your product is great, but we don't have a great experience. Now, 2 years later, when I go to see customers, many of them are quite impressed with how we do this. And it's really come down to creating a strong team with the right incentives and kind of the right mindset to address this challenge.
Cool. Interesting. Really like it. What was a tactic you applied which actually didn't succeed, where you had a problem identified, started something new, and in the end, you had to realize your approach was not the right one?
So, funnily enough, coming from the new business side myself, I'm going to switch on the new business side for something that hasn't worked, which, obviously is not great for me, but was a great learning experience. We're in a compliance environment, right? Our customers are usually in compliance, data privacy, these kind of things. And so when we try to diversify a little bit from our classic inbound channels, which has been the way that the company has grown in the past, we were looking at how can we, drive outbound sales, right? And I think there's a lot of ways nowadays to do this more efficiently. It's a very interesting space with a lot of development. But we had some restraints. We didn't want to use cold email in a way that everybody else used it. We certainly didn't want to blast our customers. There were some principal elements here. And so we really tried to implement this sophisticated strategy. We call it inbound-led outbound, where we first try to generate opt-ins with account-based marketing, and then kind of try to prospect into those accounts only to make sure that we had some sort of intent that was already shown by the customer. And this was a massive effort. I mean, we worked a lot with different tools. We implemented a structure where, we would focus on different accounts. When there would be any sort of opt-in from any person, that account, we would automatically enrich the account, trying to, kind of prospect into more stakeholders there. It took us about 3-4 months to just set this up, and then it was way too complicated for our sales team to use.
And I guess with a big clay implementation involved, most probably, or?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, big clay. It was fascinating. There was a lot of cool stuff we did. And I mean, we use it in different ways now, which works. But my point is, it needs to be simple. I mean, you cannot kind of just overstretch the organization especially when you want to try something new like outbound, and then you go and do it in a very sophisticated, difficult way with different data flows. It was too complicated for the team. And so we really moved back now to a model which is much more straightforward. We have our clear ICPs. And in a sense, we apply tools and data in a way that most organizations do it today, just maybe a little bit more targeted, a little bit more prudent. Right. But this is showing much better results than this kind of very sophisticated infrastructure. That's just my 2 cents. Big learning for me, but a project that wasn't as successful as I would have liked it to be. We made it too complicated.
Okay, interesting. So to wrap things up here, what were the 3 lessons we had from you, Mark? So let me summarize, and please adjust or comment if I not summarize it the right way. So tactic number 1 is you implemented a clear role focus with very defined focus roles, expertise, where everybody along the journey is focusing on their tasks assigned. Like this, you could have a much more efficient way of handling their topics. and you had the result that you moved things faster throughout the funnel. Also, this requires a lot of, let's say, SOPs and governance in order to align those teams. It helped to actually bring the team together and work together and towards one common goal. Tactic number 2 was treating complex customers like projects, where you need proper project management, proper planning, excellent communication, excellent alignment in order to really move towards one common goal together with your client. And this not only brought more transparency, what you have to do when, it helped you to understand challenges much faster and react to it, as well as move the projects faster to goal, increase customer happiness, and increased NRR. What I particularly like on these both things is that you actually put a very much focus on roles along the journey, right? So we have one journey. We don't build a sales and a customer success team, and we put a lot of focus on the customer needs. And one tactic which didn't work for you was trying to somehow merge the tactics where you have an inbound-led outbound motion, which made it very complicated to operate instead of just going quick and dirty to test the motion on outbound, manage it through, and then increase the complexity through things you have actually learned and automized. You went the other way around, and then the theory was very well defined, but the output didn't get you where you needed. That's why you had to adapt, scale down the complexity, and started doing outbound in a way that actually leads to results, or led to results. Anything, Mark, anything I've missed or summarized the wrong way?
No, absolutely. I think spot on. That's nothing to add.
So thank you very much for being so open and sharing your knowledge and sharing the tactics you actually applied. I think that's quite helpful for everyone really working on these topics. Before we close, what is a channel where the listeners can follow you? Is it LinkedIn the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, definitely. Feel free to connect. Absolutely. I'm always happy to kind of discuss these. And there's a bunch of groups that I'm involved in as well, where we discuss these tactics, strategies, the learnings we had. And right now there's so much need to discuss. There's so many things are changing around the technology of how we do our jobs. So always keen to connect.
Nice. So that's it for today's episode of Beyond Revenue. Mark, thank you very much for being so open and tactical and sharing really actual insights. If this episode really resonated to you and you think one of your peers, friends, or in your network could benefit from that CRO learnings, please share it. Otherwise, next episode is coming next Friday. Grounded, practical, focused, what actually matters. Thank you very much. I'm your host, Michael Jäger, and thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Michael. All the best.